Hello, fellow Blender Maniacs. This is Alex Cordabard with BlenderMania3D.com, and today I have something a little bit different than the traditional tutorials I do. It's something really special, actually. I am having an interview here with one and only Jim Vanderkyle, who is pretty much the epitome of a 3D animator and 3D artist. Now, Jim was born in Canada and he moved to the US, and he first started his art career in caricature drawings and then transitioned into 3D animation. He's been in it since 1989 and has worked in world-renowned studios such as Dreamworks, Warner Bros, and Sony Imageworks. And he's probably worked on movies that you probably know, because some of these movies I grew up on, such as The Little Mermaid, Kung Fu Panda 1 and 2, and The Iron Giant, one of my personal favorites. I absolutely love that movie. And he was actually nominated as the Best Animator Annie Award for his work in The Iron Giant. He's also worked on other movies such as Stuart Little 2, Shark Tale, Puss in Boots, and Over the Hedge, and many more. So I'm absolutely pleased to have Jim Vanderkyle here with me to share with us his knowledge and his wisdom on the art of 3D animation. And with that, thank you for being here, Jim. Appreciate it.
Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah.
Appreciate it. Yeah.
Absolutely. And this will just be like a laid back interview, just back and forth. And my first question, obviously, how did you get started into the industry of 3D animation, and why did you pick that route?
Into 3D animation?
Yeah, 3D
okay.
art. How did you get into there?
Okay. Well, it started really on the Iron Giant. They were just introducing Maya 1.0. Actually, the studio was going to go with the other one. What was it called? It was very popular back then. I can't remember the name right now, but it was Maya 1.0, and then they wanted to do the Giant in 3D.
Really?
Because it was probably, they felt that that was the best way to do it, because it was very mechanical. It was very doable at that point, because they couldn't do humans very well. Huh. So they asked for people who were interested in 3D animation. I'm like, yeah, I love computers. I loved my Amiga. I had an Amiga computer back then.
I don't even know what that
is. Yeah. Maybe some people do. I don't know. You know the history of computers. There were three platforms. There was the Mac, there was the PC, and then there was the Amiga. And the Amiga was actually the first computer that did the multitasking. It had separate processors for everything. It was a super great computer, but it had no marketing anyway. So I was super into computers at that time, and I thought, yeah, why not? I'd love to try this. And so then they hired too many 3D animators, and so they were all sitting around really doing nothing. I couldn't really work on the Giant at all. So I just stuck to my 2D animation at that point. But I did get a flavor of the 3D stuff, and I'm like, oh, this is kind of cool. So the next movie was Osmosis Jones. So I was still a 2D animator, but then I would go up to the third floor of the building where the 3D animators were, and I said, how about giving me some scenes that you guys don't want, like the moving holds, the little reaction shots, stuff like that, and small anticipated shots. So I did those, and I did pretty good with it, and so I used that as a sort of a launching pad. Plus some of the work that I did, experimental work on Maya on the Giant, because we had access to the Giant rig at that time, and I showed that to Sony, who was getting ready to do Stuart Little, and that's how I made my transition into Sony, and so they hired me based on that. They were also training 2D animators because there weren't enough 3D animators at that time. There was nothing like it is today, where you can learn it, like you have, like with Blender, and there's so many online courses now that you can just learn animation. But they didn't have that back then, so they were training 2D animators, and a lot of 2D animators couldn't handle it. It was just a different way of thinking, so they kind of dropped off, and so there was no way I would get a job today with what I had. It's just not enough. But because I had the 2D experience, they thought, okay, let's take a chance on this guy. So I got into Sony, and my first stuff I was supposed to go on Stuart Little, but before Stuart Little was ready, we were working on the first Harry Potter movie. And we were doing the effects for the Harry Potter. We did the Quidditch scenes, and we did the troll in the bathroom, and there was some other stuff. So I worked basically on the Quidditch, you know, on the broomstick, playing the Quidditch game that they did on the broomsticks, and then also did the troll in the bathroom. So that was my first stuff.
So you're pretty much a part of a lot of my childhood, basically. And
yeah, but it was exciting because I was part of the history of this growth. Yeah. And also on even before the Iron Giant, we were starting to get into 3D animation. Warner Brothers was putting a lot of money into their feature animation, and the horse we did the Quest for Camelot. I don't know if you ever know that movie. Yeah. It was a 2D movie, but we did the horses basically in 3D and traced it. And they put me, for some reason, I don't know why they chose me, but they chose me to be on help with the horse cycles. And I worked with this 3D animator, and we were trying to put a horse cycle together so that we could put in perspective and then, you know, trace the horses and then put it into the movie. But we didn't have IK back then. So whenever you changed the you know, you rotated the chest, then you'd have to counter animate with and try to make sure that the foot was being planted on the ground. It was like crazy, but that's all we had, so we just worked with what we could, you know.
Yeah. You know, so you Blender users, no complaining. They didn't even have IK back then, so no complaining. Let me ask, because you know, a lot of people, especially a lot of people that are probably watching this are probably starting out and everything, and they might get like frustrated because, you know, they see so much awesome work, but then what they're making is still beginner. Did you have like a natural skill or talent for drawing, animation, caricature?
Oh yeah, I was like super great at everything I did.
Just born like that, right?
Yeah, it was easy. It was pretty much pressing the button and everything would animate by itself. I was like amazed.
Did you have to put in a lot of hard work and like learn? And
yeah. But I didn't see it as work. I just saw it as like learning, you know. Yeah. It wasn't really work. It was just like being fascinated by this
I like that
tool. So it really wasn't. I didn't consider it work. I just call it. It was more of an obsession. I like that. To figure it out, you know. Yeah. So like there were times I remember being at Sony. It was my first professional 3D job. So I was doing the troll, and I caught myself counter animating myself in a pickle because there was two things that were going against each other. I'm like, oh my god! I started to panic, which happened quite a lot, you know. So, but in order to solve the problem, I would stay till like 12 o'clock at night, you know, trying to figure out what I did wrong and fix it, you know, so I could show it in dailies and you know, kind of like get a buy off on it.
Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, that's what I do when there's an issue. See, even people who are working in studios like yourself, they come across some roadblocks and things that they have to figure it out. Yeah. Some people have the misconception, like someone working at a studio, like they know everything and they don't have to learn. Like sometimes they don't have to learn everything, or they're professionals. But no, there's always some learning or roadblocks that you might have to encounter. Maybe even to this day, I don't know. Maybe now you're free of everything and you're an expert at absolutely everything.
No, there's still stuff I'm learning. You know, even the young guys that come in, the young women, you know, I sometimes ask them, like, how do you do this? Because, you know, they go to school and they get an overall, you know, they learn rigging, they learn modeling, they do everything. And I never really did that. All I did was make it move on the screen, and just that's all my job was, somehow to make it move. I didn't have to rig anything. Yeah. So so sometimes they have they're more facile with the technology of like finding stuff. It's like well, I work with Maya, but it's like a giant toolbox, you know. In different programs, they put the hammer in a different drawer.
Exactly.
And so you have to find out where they put the hammer, you know. It's like, you know where it is over there, but where is it on this program? Yeah. You know, how do you get to there? And sometimes it's a simple thing. Like you hit a combination of keys and suddenly Maya does something, and go, what the heck happened, you know? But you know what the great thing is? If something like that happens now, I just, you know, I don't know why it took so long, but now I just Google it. Because you can almost ask the question in Google, and then someone has already had that question, and it's there. The answer's there within, you know, you don't have to go searching for it, you know. But
yeah, no, it's great. And I want to put emphasis on like you still asking questions to other people, because I know in the Blender community, some people are afraid to ask like beginner questions, because then all the people that are higher up, whatever, like always badger on them, like, oh, that's a noob question, whatever. But what I'm saying is to everyone watching, always ask questions, no matter if you think it's a noob question or if you're higher up, because that's the only way you can learn. If you're afraid to ask questions, I mean, that's probably how you got so far, by towards asking questions, Googling it, and not being afraid to not know, and, you know, find out.
It's just knowing that you don't know, you know, at that point. And just being humble about it and just asking questions. You know, plus you have to learn the principles of animation, of course. You know, I mean, that's the same. That doesn't change. You know, that's the history of animation going back to the Disney days, and, you know, old Warner Brothers and Fleischer Studios, all that stuff that animators learn, the language of animation. You should know that. But the technology is basically, you have a vision of how things are going to move, and then it's like, what tool do you want to use to make it move? You know, you have the pencil, or you have a program like Blender, and then it's just a matter, like when I teach, the biggest roadblock is really the technology. You have that ideal scene of of what you want to do, and then you have all these obstacles in the way. You just have to break down that obstacle, and then get rid of bad habits that animators have learned basically on their own when they try to make stuff move, and they're just trying to put a square peg in a round hole all the time. And then they just muscle their way through it. And I'm like, well, there's an easier way, you know?
I sometimes find that, it's important to learn, but it's also important to unlearn the bad things that you might.
If you have a bad habit, be willing to let it go.
Be willing. That's the key. And I really want to ask this, because seeing as you've worked in you know, world-renowned studios like DreamWorks and Warner Bros. And everything, a lot of people in Blender are probably hoping or wanting to make a living, make money with their skills that they learn in 3D. So kind of what was your, what do you recommend for someone who's probably learning Blender, they're getting into the industry, and they want to go to like a studio and they want to work at DreamWorks, or, you know? Well,
the thing that you need to show them, whether it's through Blender or some other program, is that you have to show a very competent reel that you can look at what you've animated, and it has entertainment value. It has a good sense of, you know, body mechanics, a sense of entertainment. And so they're gonna hire you based on your reel. If you, let's say, put together a 1-minute story and it's brilliant, and you've used Blender and you don't use their software, if you don't use Maya, then that's okay. It's just, they're gonna teach you, you know.
Do they, I don't know if you know, but do they go off your reel, like on the storytelling, or how like the feeling of it, or if it conveys emotion, or just like
the competition is getting rougher because everybody has access to learning about animation now. So what would have been acceptable maybe 7-8 years ago just won't be good enough now. Something has to stand out, you know. Something has to stand out. So yes, you can do a guy climbing a tree and jumping off and doing something else, and but if you do it in a way that's unique, something that's incredibly entertaining, and if you got some way to show some originality, that's what's going to get you noticed. I've seen some reels that are competent and they're very good, and you get hired for sure, but maybe not at DreamWorks, maybe not at Disney, maybe not at Pixar, because they're looking for that spark of that creativity, that originality that's going to show them that, you know, you can take a scene and plus it, make it better. Do some stuff that are not just in the storyboards, but there's even more stuff there. I mean, there's always a need for people who can take a storyboard and then animate what's in the storyboard and hit all those poses and make it look good. But then there's that one person that does something extra. That's the thing. Like we have one guy at our studio now. I'm in Montreal, and I keep telling him, so, dude, you know, when you're done with this show, I want you to send your reel to Pixar, because he's got that originality, quirkiness about him that I think would fit in at a studio like that. So.
Yeah, and when you say that, I don't know if when you say that, it makes me think of a certain animation that comes to mind. I don't know if you've seen it, but it was rather simplistic, but just the feel of the story really got to a lot of people, and that was the animation of Kiwi. You know, that little bird with the tree, and it hammers the tree, and it tries on the mountain, and it tries to fly. I don't know if you've ever seen that. It got like 100 million views or 50 million views on YouTube, and it was just it was pretty simplistic, but the story and the feeling behind it special.
If you can hit somebody with a cool story, yeah, for sure, that's gonna resonate, you know. But there's so many careers. I mean, it's just working at the big 5 studios. That's surely an end goal, because there's a lot of financial security in that, I guess, and to some degree, you know. But there's so many other methods. There's lots of studios out there everywhere. And Montreal is growing like crazy.
Yeah.
We have like the small studio that I'm working at is great. But then Cinesight is there. They're based in London, and they do special effects, and plus they're doing their own features. There's Mikros. They came out with, they helped DreamWorks with the Captain Underpants, and then there's so many, like Ubisoft has been here for a while. They do games, and Real Effects just happened to come up to Montreal. Real Effects did some feature anim. They did the Book of Life, I think. So yeah, there's lots of stuff happening in Montreal. So there's studios everywhere. There's studios in Toronto. There's studio in Vancouver. There's Los Angeles. They have Blue Sky on the West Coast, East Coast, and then. And then there's probably a bunch of smaller studios and TV studios. So there's work everywhere to be had. So get your experience any way you can, and then leverage your way to where you want to go.
I like that you mentioned that, though, because a lot of people always think of like DreamWorks, Pixar, etc., like the top 5, but they don't think about the thousands of other studios that are around the world that are just as lucrative or fun.
Yeah.
And, I actually met Jim at DreamWorks. I went to visit him at DreamWorks, and let me tell you, DreamWorks is pretty cool. They got like a cafeteria, ping pong table, all this stuff. It's like a Disneyland for 3D animators.
Yeah, that's not the norm, believe me. Now I work at a kind of like a
Starbucks there.
Big warehouse, just lined up tables, and I'm sitting right next to everybody else. And
right now in Canada?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
There's a difference.
So either go to Canada or DreamWorks. So, well, it all depends, you know. There's some perks, but I like that. And do you have any tips or suggestions? Because a lot of people have a belief that I think is really hindering them, because a lot of people want to do 3D animation or art as their work, but they have this belief that I can't make money with art. Do you have
I mean, like
your art ever since your caricature drawings and your course and all that in DreamWorks? So do you
well, the idea that, you know, that's sort of like a limiting belief that people can have, right? It's that comes from a lot of things. Like I had a bit of that when I was growing up, because, you know, my dad was an engineer, my brother's an engineer, my uncle's an engineer, his kids are engineers. So we're a family.
So logically, you would become a 3D animator, obviously.
Well, there is that connection, because, you know, the engineering part of animation is in the, you know, you have to work with technical stuff. So that kind of appeals to me as well. But I also had this artistic side, because I always used to draw all the time, and I like drawing and creating stuff. So, but my parents, they had the idea that they didn't want to see their son trying to sell their paintings on the sidewalk. They're kind of like very fearful of that. And they didn't really do any research as to the kind of careers you can have in art. Now, animation at that time really wasn't, it was even before the new golden era, because I got in at Disney right when that resurgence of 2D animation started happening on The Little Mermaid. And then culminated in the big brouhaha of The Lion King, which made a lot of money.
I saw The Lion King last week at an outside amphitheater. I loved it.
Oh, did you? Yeah. And then after The Lion King, it was still plateauing at that point, and then it went on a nosedive. But at the same time that was diving, we got Toy Story, and in Toy Story, it was like a big cross dissolve, And as that was tanking, Toy Story was moving everything in a new direction, and 3D was starting to happen. So it was like, oh, okay, it's just a matter of learning how to jump over to the other side. So, I was lucky in that respect. But going back to the limiting beliefs, is that you just have to stay focused. I mean, if you believe in yourself, then you'll find work. I mean, there's so many younger kids that I can tell, like when I was teaching, there was a guy who was 18 years old in my class, and he showed some promise, and he put the work into it. And I said, hey, I think we might have a position for you at my studio. And he thought about it, and he said, well, maybe I should finish my class first, because he's Chinese and he's got a tiger mom. And so they were wanting him to have a very secure job. And then he said, I think I want to take a chance. And right out of high school, he went straight to work with us, and he's been doing really great. He's now been with us for 2 years. He's got a nice little show reel to show, and now we're almost done with our production. He's going to probably move on to some other studio, and his career has started, right? But he put in the work. He showed the ambition. He signed up for a class. He was learning, and I see a lot of kids like that. They're very, very focused and very dedicated, and you see that spark in their eye that they want to work, and then they're not going there like you owe me a job attitude. Like, I want to prove myself to you, and I really want something to happen here. And I think that's true in any profession. Like, if you just think the world owes you work, then that's the wrong attitude to have. You have to get out there and do it. So that will overcome those limiting beliefs. You have to really force yourself to break through into that.
Yeah, no, the reason I appreciate you sharing that, because also the reason I asked that is because even me with Blender, before I started making my course and everything, like I said, for 6 years I held myself back because I had these limiting beliefs. So it might seem small, but it's actually really big, because a lot of people then go into another field, like, another job that because their parents want them to be secure and stuff, instead of following their passion, and then they regret it like 50, 30, 20 years down the road.
Right.
And so I want every Blender user watching this, if Blender's your passion and 3D arts is your passion, go for it. Don't make any excuses. Don't listen to anybody else. Put the work in, focus, and there's no reason that you can't make a living doing either Blender, freelancing Blender, working at a studio, working with Maya and another, at Dreamworks. There's no reason that you can't.
Yeah, and sometimes, like, if I compare myself to other disciplines, right? I'm sort of like a hobbyist weightlifter. And I'm always looking at people with those 6-pack abs, and I go, yes, that's got to be me, and I want to do this. And you can't get there without the work. You have to be passionate about it. You've got to do it, or else it's not going to come out. And so be honest with yourself. If it's not really your passion, then move on to something else that you can get a buzz on. Find something that's not, like, maybe you've heard somewhere that, like, I've seen people do this, like some guy said, oh, I'm struggling, I want to find a new job. I heard animation is a way to make money. I saw some advertisement, you can make work here and there, and all you have to do is push a few buttons, and you can learn animation. And so they think it's easy. And there's no initial desire to tell a story. They don't like to observe things move, you know. And so, you know, they show me what they've done, and I'm like, hey, so you think I can get a job? I go, no, dude, you can't get a job. This stuff, it sucks. You know, it's like
there's no passion.
Yeah, there's nothing there that shows you that you really want to do this. You just, it's like, you know, you saw some advertisement on TV or something like that. Be a dental assistant or something, you know, and like I can get a job and, you know, make some money. You know, that's not the attitude you got to have. You gotta be interested in what you're doing. You know, you gotta have a focus in terms of what it is there, and people could smell you out if you're not like that. You know, if it's just a job where you just want to put in your 8 hours and go home and tell your wife like, yeah, you know, got my money, what's for dinner? You know, that's not the that's not the thing. It's a different type. It's animation is it is a little bit of a I almost want to say it's a cult. It's like joining a fraternity. You know, everybody's into the passion of creating great stories and putting together something that's going to be memorable on the screen. If you have that, then yes, you're going to become part of the family. You know, so that's sort of my advice. The advice is like, if it's not in your blood. What is this thing sticking out of my head? For Christ's sakes. If it's not in your, it's my other microphone. It looks weird up there. If it's not in your blood, just be honest with yourself. It's not there, you know.
Yeah.
But if you're really interested in it, it's like, yeah, believe in yourself and go for it.
Yeah, but I love that you mentioned that. And yeah, I don't think people should pursue it just for money, because then if it's just for money, the passion might not be there, and then you won't even get the money anyways.
Right.
But also the passion, because on my course, I have like over 1,000 comments or reviews on my course already. And literally like half the comments is like, I love your energy. I love your passion. It's not even about what I'm teaching. It's like,
yeah,
they love the energy because they could feel my excitement for teaching the subject, teaching Blender and animation.
right.
I just get naturally excited.
Yeah.
And I think the Blender community, everyone who's doing Blender for the most part, I've never seen someone who's doing Blender who doesn't like it. And you can definitely do Blender as a hobby, but if you want to make money with it, you know, like you said, don't treat it as a hobby like weightlifting. Go for it, put in the work, and you could absolutely make it into whatever you want.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm not familiar too much with the Blender software. I've seen a few things, and I never really downloaded it. I don't have to, because I already have like Maya, and all the studios like Pixar and Dreamworks, they have their own software that seems to work perfectly.
But let me ask, because the skills of animation are transferable, right? So if someone learns animation in Blender, if they want to go to Dreamworks, they could transfer it, right?
That's why I said, like, if you have a great reel and you did everything in Blender, it doesn't matter. They'll hire you, because and then they'll teach you, and you just transfer what you know, and just like I said, you just the hammer's in a different drawer. You just gotta go look for the hammer. Well, even navigating, you know, the 3D space, you know, in Maya, it's Control Alt and then middle mouse button, and that way you move around. It could be different in others, and so it's like you know, you're used to driving on the left-hand side, and then you go to England and everything's on the right-hand side. It's like, well,
it's transferable. You could easily learn it, and you adapt to the new habits.
Kind of like a muscle memory.
Exactly, which is cool. And one thing that I want to get into a little bit more technical. We covered like the money of making it as for a job and everything, but I want to go over what's your animation workflow, because I know in Blender a lot of users are wondering like, what's the workflow for animation, and how do especially professional animators, what's their workflow that they go through? What's a professional's workflow for animation?
Okay, so you're in a studio, you have a scene or maybe a bunch of scenes in a row, so you have some continuity to your drawing, to your work. You'll get a storyboard, and then you'll also get a layout. The layout is with all the characters in it, with the 3D space and the set and everything modeled, all that stuff is there. And then you're asked to put the performance into it. And so the first thing you need to do is you have to do your blocking part, right? You have to block out the key poses. And this is the exact same thing that you had to do if you were a 2D animator. That hasn't changed. I like to block things, and most studio animators will block things in stepped. Stepped is like you hold a pose and then it pops into the next pose and it pops into the next pose. That's why you have these stepped type curves on your graph editor. So, and that simulates also the same thing that the 2D animator does, is because, you know, when he's flipping his drawings, he's got a drawing representing the first pose, and then 10 frames later, that's the second pose, and then 6 frames later, that's the third pose. So he's flipping the drawings and trying to imagine it moving, and then making and clarifying those poses. Well, it's the same thing that you do in when you're blocking out. So you have to have those key poses in there. And then it's best to do it in step, because if you do everything in spline, then the computer is giving you a lot of stuff that may or may not work. But if you're stepping it, every pose that you go to is you created it. The computer didn't do anything to help you. You know, you pose that finger, you pose the arm, you pose the tilt of the head, you posed where the rotation of the feet are, etc. The computer didn't give you anything by accident. So so you pose it out. Yeah, I mean, you can work in the beginning in spline so that you can see the transition, but when you play it back, make sure you play it back in steps so you can see only your poses, and see if it works. You know, see if there's a certain flow happening. If you can make it flow in the stepped, then the transition from that to fleshing it out completely in a spline is going to be a lot easier. So that's really, honestly, the best way to do it. And that's the way most 99% of all the big studios will do it. You know, and it really harkens back to the old day of the 2D animation. It's the same technique of blocking out. So once you block it out, you get it done, you get it approved by the supervisor and the director, and then you're good to go for the next phase, which is to flesh out the animation. So there might be a couple extra head shakes, and there might be some flourishes of the hands, and you improve the arcs of the hands, and you track what's happening with the arcs. You know, you have some tracking software that helps you figure out where all that stuff is going. And then slowly but surely, you whittle away until you come up with a pretty decent, you know, moving piece of animation. And then the last part is like, okay, you're done, and then you really start to put on the little microscope, you know, and you look for penetrations, and you look for little things, maybe an extra eye dart to help out with the emotional content of the scene. So you look for little things to make it even better, you know. That's the polish. So there's 3 phases. There's the blocking, the spline, and the polish. Those are the 3 phases. And then when you're polished, a good idea is kind of, you know, maybe take a couple hours off, or maybe even a day, and look back at it next, and then you'll start seeing more things that you can polish. Because, you know, your eye kind of gets used to stuff, and then you forget to see things. It happens all the time. But those are the 3 phases. That's the workflow, you know. In between, get a cup of coffee, and that's about basically it.
Cool. And what I want to ask you in regards to that, do you, as far as like references for animating, like for example, when you were animating like Po and Kung Fu Panda or other animations, like do you go like in the mirror and see how you would act at that, or do you go online, see references of like panda movements? Or
I did forget to mention that nowadays we're using a lot of video reference. You know, some things you can't video reference. Some of the really cartoony stuff, people, you know, like tumbling and flying through the air, or doing some super crazy cartoony stuff, that has to come out of your imagination. But a lot of stuff you can video reference just to get the mechanics done, and then you push those poses. So like and then, yeah, you do a lot of research, and thank God for, the internet, because you can do so much research on the internet. Like, if you can almost type in anything. Like, we have this scene where kids are having fun dancing, and but kids are kind of a little bit clumsy the way they do things. So you can just like Google kids having fun dancing, and you'll probably come up with something. You can just like, oh, look at the way, look how cute the way that kid is just kind of moving around. Let's use that, and then you can get inspiration from anything. If you want to break down how a dog walks, there's so many videos out there now. Before, you had to rely on the MyBridge books to figure out how that worked, and now everything is just broken down. So there's a lot of research that needs to be done. Like, if you're working on Finding Nemo, and then there's fish, I'm sure that they had like almost fish universities figuring out how fish move and how different fish move with the different fins. And so that's also part of the fun of being an animator, because you learn so much. There's animals that I have not animated. There's things that I mostly animated bipeds and a few dogs, and and then some other stuff. But giraffes move differently than wolves. A buffalo would move like, I can imagine working on Zootopia. That must have been crazy fun, because they all move differently, but to capture that in a caricatured way must have been super fun to do.
Do you find that like probably like working on different animals or characters that you've never worked on before is kind of like relearning the animation process in a way, because everything's kind of different? Like, you have to relearn how movement happens or something?
Well, I don't know if I could say that, because movement is movement, and there's a certain language to movement, and that's been pretty much codified now over the 100 years or so that animation's been in existence. So there's a certain language that's been established, and then you could say that the 12 principles of animation are part of that language. Overlap, secondary action, staging, squash and stretch. All the 12 principles are always there in animation. It's just that it's the combination of those being applied to a different animal. Even the way people walk. Sometimes if I see a peculiar walk by somebody on the street, I kind of like will walk behind them and try to figure out how that's working. I'm like, oh yeah, there's a certain twist of the hip here, rotation X versus the rotation Y, and there's more up and down in the center of gravity route. So like, you kind of analyze things, and or if I'm looking at a pigeon and they're poking their head back and forth, like, how is that possible? What are they doing with it? And how do you translate that into the language of movement? Yeah. So the language itself hasn't changed. It's just that there's different characters that have different ways of moving, and that's the fun part, because every day in animation, every time you get a new scene, it's really a new challenge. Even people, all the bipeds that you do, all the human characters, they still move differently. They're not all doing the same vanilla walk cycle. They have a different walk cycle. So that's the fun of observing life. That's you're as an animator, you're a lot of things. You're a human observer to, like you're an actor. So you have to understand the emotions, the scale of emotions and things like that. Why people are acting the way they are. But you also have to be more of a physicist, not what do you call it? Physics, right? You have to understand how gravity works, and you have to understand weight and center of gravity and all that kind of mechanical stuff as well. So there's a big range of stuff that you can learn as an animator. It's not as simple as moving something across the screen. You have to understand why or how. So there's a big thing about that's all part of the workflow, is doing your research. And they say the same thing if you're a writer. If you want to start a book, the first 6 months, maybe a year or more, it's just all about research. Just getting into, like, if you're doing a historical piece, you have to go to the library, you have to read, and you have to understand the characters, and you have to learn about them, and you have to put all this stuff together, and then you have an idea of how the story will go, but then it becomes more fleshed out. It's the same thing with animation, is that when you do the research and how things move, or how a character moves, you have to do that, and then you apply it to your workflow, which is blocking, spline, and then polish. But yeah, but the big part of the workflow is actually the research. And as I said before, you have YouTube, and you have Vimeo, and have the internet to all help you, gather all that research that you need to figure out how to improve. And plus, you have the history of animation too. Like, there's realistic motion, and then there's the cartoony caricatured stuff. So you have to do both.
Mm-hmm.
You have to be grounded in your own observation of life, but then you also have to have a good grasp of what's happened in the past and how they've done their own stuff. And everything builds, like when they're doing Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs, or Hotel Transylvania, that style of that snappy, crazy way of going from pose to pose was borrowed probably from Tex Avery, and they built on that, and then brought it into 3D animation, and now that's become something that people will now research and look at, and then from there maybe it'll morph into some other kind of style, and people 20 years from now will be looking at those things. So it's a constantly evolving thing, but you should be interested in what has happened before to build up, and then the whole idea of animation being caricature is the whole idea of caricaturing movement, and personalities, etc. So yeah. So,
no, and I like that evolves kind of like music and everything. But one key thing that you were mentioning while you were talking about animating, I wanted to touch upon rigging a little bit, because I think I had read something that you said where there's no unanimatable pose, just bad rigging and everything, because in Blender, people usually rig, animate, they do everything. So how important is good rigging? You're like, oh man. And have you ever had a bad rig, and how important is good rigging?
Yeah, bad rigging is something it's like we have this love-hate relationship with riggers. I don't really rig at all, to be honest. And good riggers are valuable. They're like diamonds in the rough. If you can get one at a studio, you keep them. And so yeah, we've had some rough riggers that we had one rigger one time we were gearing up for our TV show, and for some reason he used this complex muscle system rigging, which they use in effects for these simple characters that had the same proportions as as a simple cartoon: big head, medium-sized body, little tiny short legs, right? So they all look like Cartman, from South Park. So he put a muscle system, and the rigs were completely slow. They weren't putting in the same facial expressions. It hardly could get a really decent smile out of it that looked cartoony. So you can't do anything with a rig that is like that. It's too complex. It's overly complex. So yeah, rigging is super important in order to get the kind of performance that you need. And that's part of the technology that kind of gets in the way. And that's nothing like when I teach, I can't help that part of it. We can't go in and start rigging, because that's a whole nother discipline that you need to do. So hopefully when you choose a rig to animate, that it's already been proven to be workable. And there's a few out there that are pretty good that people use a lot. So yeah, so rigging is important.
Yeah, it definitely helps with the animation workflow and how your animation looks and the poses you're able to do. Because I've worked also with rigs where you can't do a certain pose, because then all of a sudden
everything distorts, right?
Yeah.
The geometry gets out of whack. There's interpenetrations in it. You just can't get the nice shapes that you need. Yeah. So like when you're posing, you should think like a 2D animator. You're thinking in terms of like, how's this shape look? How is it silhouetted? Is it clear? You know, can you get those really nice flow, line of action, and and it helps if, you know, like I say, I have a 2D background, so I know how to draw, and so it's really about creating good shapes, and you have to have a good eye for that as well. So if the rig doesn't supply you to get there, then yeah, you're really limited on what you can do. You need to find, either make it yourself, or you do what you can with what you have.
And as far as animating, like, do you, when you animate something, what goes through your head when you're animating it? Do you look for like the feeling that it conveys, or if it's like logical, or do you exaggerate it a little bit to convey a feeling, or you keep it like,
yeah, like
what goes through your mind when you're animating something?
Well, first of all, I'll use reference when I can, and then I'll just block out the reference. I'll even put the reference in the background, so I could see it, like, oh, on this pose he's doing this and this and this. So I'll just block out the key poses just with the reference, and then at some point I'm going to throw that reference away. I'm just going to hide it so I don't see it anymore, and I'll just look at what I see in terms of the movement, and then like, oh, I can push this arc, I can stretch this more, you know, I can make this a little bit more cartoony, I can make this expression bigger or whatever. At that point, that's when you start the caricature. It's kind of like I do have a hobby of drawing caricatures. It's like, first of all, you put the portrait, you paint the portrait, and then you go, okay, now what can I do to, you know, I see that his nose is slightly bigger than the rest of his face, so maybe I can make the nose even bigger. And let's say his ears are really tiny ears, so like, let's make those ears like super small. And he's got a huge jaw, so okay, big nose, huge jaw. We have to work out with the proportions and stuff. So it's the same thing when you get into the animation, like, okay, he's moving this way. Can I time it a little bit faster? Can I make it get there sooner so that it has that really snappy timing, which I kind of like, you know. And animation is always good if you kind of speed things up a little bit, you know. You can do the regular motion, and then maybe it's a good idea to just do everything faster, and then that'll give you more of a cartoony feel to what you're doing. So it's always taking what you have and then pushing it as much as you can.
And as far as like, because sometimes you see animations and there's a fine line between it being animated and not looking alive to where the character is actually brought to life. Like, in your personal experience, have you found like a particular thing that makes your character come to life more? Like when you do, like, for example, like I'm assuming there's a lot of different things, but is there one thing that really brings your character to life when you animate that? Like, it could be eye movement or
yeah, I mean, if you get the mechanics right and everything else, and then if you're getting into the facial expressions, the eye darts are cool because they can show that someone's thinking. And then if you get the blinking right at the right moments, and then that can show you a change of thought. You know, there's a sort of a science to that, you know, the way people are, where their eyeballs go. Like if they're remembering a smell, their eyeballs go to a certain, if they're recalling a moment back in their eyes might go up. So it's kind of having an intuition for that kind of thing. It's nothing that you can really codify. They have tried, you know, but for most animators, I think it's just mostly instinct, trying to figure out, you know, those expressions on your face that you're trying to recreate. And so those are some of the ways, you know, you can do it with blinks and eye darts and little head motions.
It's the subtlest of things, right?
They're like, very subtle. Yeah, they're very subtle. Just, I mean, especially when you're doing close-up acting, where you just, you know, you just see the head and shoulders and stuff. So those are probably the hardest thing to do when the head's like not moving that much. Yeah. And so you need to put the life into it. And so the eyebrows are also very expressive. If you do, I've noticed also that if you are doing the video reference, even professional actors, their eyebrows really don't have as much expression. They don't really move that much when you think about it. But if you really want to add more expression, you really need to exaggerate those eyebrows to get something to register, especially if you want to push the sadness. You've got to really push those eyebrows up, and anger. You kind of like, it's like, you know, the smiley faces that we do all the time. You know, they're graphic representations of those emotions, but they still kind of work. So you need to exaggerate that as well. But to get the life, it's hard to say. It's like at some point in your animation, there's that your character jumps out and becomes real, and that could be believable.
Yeah, because I remember one time I did theater, I performed on stage, and they told me when you act on stage, you have to exaggerate it so the audience sees it. In animation, it's a little bit like that, not to the extreme because then it looks fake, but you have to exaggerate it to some degree, right?
Right. Well, because if you're a theater actor, you have to make it more known to the person in the back, and they're basically using the same principles of silhouette. You know, like if you're drinking some water, you don't want to pour the water in front of your chest, because then people go, "What's he doing?" I don't know. But if you did it off to the side and you poured the water, then oh yeah, he's pouring water into a pitcher of water. So like, okay, that makes sense. So you play those same, and those are all part of the 12 principles of animation. It's just learning those, you know, and that's communicating something. And I guess that helps bring it to life. I don't know. It's hard to say. Man, that's a good question. I'll probably ponder that now. At what point can you say that? What is it that brings something to life? So come back to me in a year and I'll have
All right, we'll do another interview in a year. No, but because sometimes I've seen some really good animation, everything looks right, but you don't feel the aliveness of the character. You don't feel like it has a soul, like it's alive. It feels dead, even though everything looks good. So it's like really, it's the feeling that it conveys, those little subtle things. That's like you said, it's kind of like, it's hard to put into words. It's kind of just like a feeling.
I think it's probably mostly to do with the eyes. I think it's the eyes, especially on the close-up acting part of it. Like now, even in the 2D world, you can't get the same subtle performance as you can in 3D, because don't forget, you had to draw everything. So if you wanted a simple micro movement, and you have a pencil width, which is like maybe 0.02 millimeters thickness, right? And if you want to move 0.20 millimeters off to the side just to get that little eye dart, it'll just look like something's wrong. It's flashing. So if you look at even the good Disney animation, their eye positions are pretty wide and big. They don't really have that subtle stuff happening as you can in 3D animation. So the performances in 3D animation are getting way more sophisticated. They can convey a lot more emotions than they could, but it's still based on the same idea of 2D. It's like 2D animation is like that base color of, you know, getting emotions, and now 3D animation is like you get all these complexities that you can dial in there that you could never get before. So in that respect, 3D animation has surpassed 2D in terms of performance, and that's what brings it to life, you know.
Yeah, and one thing I want to touch on, because you talk about surpassing, because I remember when I visited Dreamworks, I saw some motion capture thing, like with, you know, suits and motion capture. So I'm curious to know, what's your opinion on like motion capture? Will it replace like 3D animators, or how do you see that working, especially now and in the future? Like,
no, I don't see it replacing it. And maybe in some disciplines, like a lot of games are very realistic, and they have to be realistic. So it might happen for that, especially for film. Like if they're doing like another Planet of the Apes movie, they're going to be using motion capture because those little subtle movements are hard to dial in. Some people are super good at it, but it's a pretty good skill to have, to get in all those little subtle movements of a real animal, because their muscles are firing and they're twitching and they're doing all kinds of, you can't animate all this. There's a separate department that actually handles that in 3D, in the visual effects. So, but motion capture is good. I know at DreamWorks they used it at that time when you came over for just blocking, because they had these complex camera movements and they needed to figure out where the characters were going to go. So they used the motion capture just as a way of blocking out in the layout phase of a production, to figure out where those characters are at what time in the screen, so that they can calculate where that camera is going to be. That's why they used it, but they never used it really for anything except for crowds. They might have used it, or for some stuff that didn't really have that. We call, like, the main characters in a scene the hero characters, because they're the ones that are taking up all the emotional space. And then the background characters sometimes are just background characters, and all they need to do is just sort of move. And then maybe you can use motion capture for that, in other places. But yeah, I think, in my opinion, that motion capture is basically used for games, and not so much at all in feature animation. The Pixar, Disney, Blue Sky, Illumination up in France, so all those things, those are all keyframe stuff. You can't get that performance. There's no way you can get that with motion capture.
No, it makes sense, but yeah, I was thinking like it could take over the blocking phase of the animation with simplistic, and then animators.
It could.
A little bit, but
yeah.
But who knows what the future holds? I mean, there's so much advancement in 3D and everything.
Yeah.
But I'm also curious, like, because you started drawing caricatures and everything, did that help you in any way to be able to animate better, or being able to draw caricatures?
To animate better, maybe. I don't know, but it taught me how to push and caricature things. But it's just, they use the word caricature, even in the old Disney manuals, they talk about caricaturing life, and a lot of the Disney animators were brilliant caricature artists. As a matter of fact, at Disney, every year they have a caricature show, so people just throw in their caricatures of everybody that's been working, and then they have this big, huge exhibition every year. It's an ongoing tradition. And so caricature is very much a part of being an animator, in terms of like pushing that
boundary.
Yeah, the boundaries. And it's basically, caricature is just taking what you see and then really bringing out something very unique to that person, or that character, or that like caricature could be, let's say, like in Zootopia, they caricatured all the animals and how they moved. So some animals would move very slowly. Like, remember the sloth in the movie? Well, he doesn't move that slow, but they move them extra slow. See, that's caricature, right? You're taking something and then really taking that one unique thing about it. It doesn't even necessarily have to be one thing, but it could be something in relationship to another. But and then really change and really putting your focus on that one aspect. So that's a prime example of what caricature is. It's like that sloth character. When he moved, everything was super slow motion. And so you need to do that with everything. So like the character is like super fast, and if somebody's got high energy and they're moving around, so you have a character that's just like zipping from one pose to another. Impossible to do in real life, but in animation it just makes sense because you can do that. That's the great thing about animation, is that you can do stuff in animation you cannot do in live action.
So that's pretty cool. I never thought about that. So in animation, we are keeping like like realistic things, but we're also making it unrealistic and more like caricature type
Yeah.
stuff as well in certain things. So it's like a combination of both,
Right.
like realism and completely unrealistic.
Yeah, and a caricature is always based on something real. It's always based. If it doesn't have that real base to it, it's not really caricature.
Yeah.
You know, it like a caricature has to you have to recognize that person, even if it's just a circle and two dots, and then you can go, oh my God, that's Alex right there. You know, we can see Alex, and if you can simplify something in just in three shapes, that's a challenge. You can put yourself, draw this person in with three different kinds of shapes, and then if you can do it, you've caricatured, right? But you're simplifying at the same time you're exaggerating. You're taking out everything that's, you know, noise, and then you're just bringing in the thing that needs to be focused on.
That's pretty cool. I never thought about it that way because I was kind of curious how caricature fit into animation and everything.
Yeah,
but
it's the same.
We use it all the time. It's yeah.
It's the same process. It's exactly the same way of thinking.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then I was kind of because we're getting closer to wrapping up and everything.
Yeah.
But I was curious, like, what are the three things that you need in order to become or to be a professional animator like yourself, you think? Like, what are the top three things that you think you need, whether it's work ethic or a sense of movement? Like, what are the top three things?
That's a good. Well, first I think would be a sense of commitment and belief in yourself, and a passion for performance and observation of life, you know, and wanting to tell a story, or help somebody to tell a story. Because as an animator, you're not telling the story. It's the director and the producers and the writer. Okay, these guys are the ones that are writing the story, and you're helping them tell the story. So you want to be able to help them tell the story. Some people are really good at telling stories, and some people, you know, we can help them tell the story. So you have to have a sense of story, and the desire to want to do that. You know, even as a kid, I like drawing. I also kind of like acting. So it kind of like the two came together in terms of animation. I like to, you know, as a kid, I was like pretending I was Superman, or, you know, doing, you know, maybe doing some accents and things like that. So, you know, if you have, and also notice that animators are either very good at playing a musical instrument, or they're good at some kind of movement thing like dancing or sports, and possibly, you know, things like mathematics or something like that. You know, the beauty of math or something. There's something about, you know, understanding timing. So there's a sense of that too. You got to have as an animator. But to be successful, I think the most common thing that everybody has as successful is the fact that it's almost like they don't even know what it's not. It's hard to say, because like there's a thing, if you really want to know, there's a guy who created a thing, you can write this down, it's called the Letters Project.
Letters Project.
Yeah, and what he did was he said, hey, I really like animation. He started writing to all the professional animators, and they're like, what did you do to get into animation? And then somebody from Pixar, hey, Willie, yeah, if you want to become an animator, like when I was going to, like, my parents thought maybe it wasn't a great time, but I went ahead and I did it, and I went to school, and so he told his story. And then Willie, like you, he came to Dreamworks, and he asked me, he's like, well, what does it take? And I gave him my life story. And next thing you know, he's asking all these people from all the big studios, and he put it together in a little book. And all these people contributed to their story on how they became an animator and why they became an animator and the obstacles that they. So I think that's probably the best resource. And so I'm going to give a little plug for Will. That if you just Google the Letters Project, you're going to see a ton of stories from professional animators and how they got into the business and the obstacles that they had. Some people had big obstacles. Some people had just a simple obstacle. All they had was basically, hey, I wanted to do it, and I just went ahead and did it, and I just kept at it. Just kept learning and kept growing and got better and better. So.
I like that. It's kind of like the chicken soup for the soul, but for animators or something.
Exactly. No, that's a good way.
Collection of stories of
check it out. It's called the Letters Project, and
I will check it out. I'll put a link also at the bottom of this video for others too. And then just as we're wrapping up, one of the last questions: where do you see like 3D arts and animation going in the future? 5 years from now, 10 years from now. Where do you see it going? I
think you're going to put on like a helmet that's like kind of wired into your brain cells, and then you're just going to sit there and you're going to think about an animation scene, and you open your eyes, and then there it is.
But then everyone would be able to, there's no more skill.
Yeah, that's right. Anybody can do it. No, you probably still have to have skill. Because you have to visualize it better.
So all the visualizers and the visualize, so like Bob Proctor and all the secret people.
Yeah, everybody's gonna be in their secret little pod room, completely quiet, and they're just gonna be hooked up to all these.
Did you see the movie Ready Player One?
Not yet. I want to see it. It's probably
really good with VR. How do you see VR with animation? Do you see that?
Yeah, it's starting to be. It's starting to be really big. I know some people are into it. Our studio's into it. We created this little VR ride with the project that we're working on now. It's like these kids get into this big snow race. And so we created this little VR experience. It goes with this chair that moves, And so you put the VR thing and you feel like you're going through everything. So it could be a way of making movies. I don't know. It's hard to say. It's still in its infancy, and there's a lot of possibility to it. It takes up a huge amount of data, so they have to figure out what they're going to do with all that data. But now they're working with quantum computers now, and so before there was a limitation of space, and now it seems like with these quantum computers, they're figuring out how to just have almost this unlimited amount of space to put stuff in. So it's hard to say what's going to happen. Probably going to be like this for another 20 years until some big breakthrough happens, and then maybe VR is what's going to happen. But I hate to think that people are going to be wearing these things all day. Can you imagine coming home and then your kids are like, "Hey, Dad," and they're like, into their own world and completely can't communicate with each other anymore. I don't know. It's exciting, but at the same time, I'm kind of fearful that people won't be able to communicate. They're already on their phones now. You go to a restaurant and then you don't see people talking to each other. They're all on their phones now, and I'm guilty of it just as much as everybody. I'm not saying that I'm above it, but and if these people are going to be wearing these big, things on their faces. That's going to be the death of a family.
But do you find that an important thing when you're working on an animation project to get some breather and go outside and completely detach? It helps you in your projects of animation, right? To not.
You should take a walk, during lunch maybe. That's a good idea.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, man, you really need to see Ready Player One. It's great movie, and it goes over. There's a lot of what you just.
And I hear that the Iron Giant is like in one of the scenes too.
Oh yeah, he is. Yeah. I love that movie.
Okay.
But yeah, man, thanks again for joining us. Please
no problem.
Where can people find you? Where can they connect with you? What do you have any? What are you?
Well, LinkedIn is probably the best way if they want to directly contact with me. I also have a
link in the description.
Yeah. Where can I put that?
No, I'm gonna put the link.
Oh, you're gonna put it in? Okay, great. And then I also have my website where I teach. Actually, I'm doing private classes now. I can only handle 4 at a time. And I usually work with people who know Maya because that's how it works. But and so
they could also buy your caricature book on Amazon. I'll put the link to that.
Okay, yeah. I have. If you like to draw, I can. You can see some of my caricature work, and then I do have a book on that, which has been quite successful on Amazon. It's rated like almost 5.
Yeah, I saw
5 stars.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I got that, and then my website on and you have. I gave you the link to that, right?
Yeah, I'm gonna link all your contact info.
So you can get it. You can touch me with that, and that's it.
Cool.
Yeah.
Well, I'll make sure to link with Jim. He's an awesome guy. He's a cool guy and an expert animator. And my last question for you, and I kind of like this question, but if you could go back to when you first started your, animation adventure and projects, what's the one advice you would give to your younger self as far as like animation or for the industry,
believe in yourself more. Because I felt a couple of times I felt like when I got into the industry I was 32, and a lot of people when I was 32 and people have already been animator already for 10-12 years, and they were on their way to being like supervisors, and I was 32, and I was like still fresh, and I had to learn everything really fast to catch up with everybody. And if I had just believed in myself earlier, then I would have had the confidence to go ahead and try things that I was a little bit pulled back from. So, but I always had that, I already kind of set my sail, like I want to go there, but then there was a lot of interference along the way. It was just, if I learned how to clear out that interference, then I think I would have been, 10 years ahead of where I wanted to be at the time. So that's what I would tell my younger self. I would say, just Jim, you should have believed in yourself more. That's it. Yeah.
Well, that's awesome, and I'm glad you shared now, because I think a lot of the Blender users will get a lot of value from that, because I know a lot of my audience, I have age ranges from 10 all the way to like 80 years old, whatever.
Yeah.
But it's never too late to be someone to tell you believe in yourself more, and to actually believe in yourself more.
Yeah, and then I go more into detail on that on the letters project. That letter that I gave Willie, explain that whole thing, because it's kind of complicated. It's a little bit busy to tell here that story, but and plus a lot of other people contributed to that. But it talks a lot about my adventure getting into animation at that point. So check it out.
Definitely. Well, thanks again, man. I can't wait for you to be back in the U.S. Connect some
Good
more.
To see you again, Alex. Yeah, I'll definitely look you up when I get there.
Who knows where I'll be then? I'll be.
Oh yeah.
Who knows? But yeah, definitely. And everyone, make sure to connect with Jim. Check out his book. Check out his course. Enroll in this class if you're really interested in animation, because here you're learning from an expert who's been in the field, who knows what he's doing.
Yeah.
So with that, I want to thank you again for taking the time. And really.
Okay. Great. Thanks a lot, Alex. Okay. Bye, everybody. Take care.